Like the fact that they kept reminding us that Ang is just a kid. Okay, I know that yesterday I promised that I was going to do a follow-up on episode 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, but I was not able to actually do that because I got so much into the show that I had to just complete it. Now, I'm not going to compare this with the animated series because I feel that the animated series is its own monster and this is its own monster. I feel that they are two different products because of one, the tone, number two, just even the way the story is told is totally different. So I'm going to try to look at this particular show as its own thing. But anyway, let's get into it. Number one, the one thing that I absolutely loved about this was the opening, the first episode, and I think I talked about it over here, somewhere over here. I talked about immediately after finishing the first episode. I felt that I needed to talk about it because it's one of the best way to do an opening episode for a show that not everyone is familiar with. You know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animation, I know majority of people have seen it. Most of the people who are going to watch this and Netflix show have seen it, but you also need to remember that there are people who use Netflix who've never even heard of the Airbender. You know, there are people who don't know the characters, there are people who don't watch animations in general. So this first episode does a great job in introducing us to the world. First of all, to Kang, the protagonist, and the antagonist, the general antagonist, the fire people. And that puts people who've never interacted with the Airbender Avatar IP before to get a great idea of what they're about to get themselves in. One, in terms of tone, two, in terms of the visual style that the show is going for. The tone, this is a much darker tone as compared to the show. It's much grounded, it's much more focused, it's much more less playful as compared to, you know, the first animated show. So the other thing the first episode does very well is how it chooses to just give us an idea of the four components that are going to be a part of this particular universe. You know, the earth benders, the water benders, the air benders, and the fire benders. And they don't only talk about it, they actually show using good visual effects and practical effects in some points, and just give us an idea of how these particular people work. Keyword, give us an idea. They don't completely show us what they are about during the first episode, but they just give us an idea of how these people work. And that, I think, did a great job in setting up what this show is going to be about. It did a great job in bringing in people and telling them, this is what we are on about. In fact, that can work very well at its own standalone thing. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so let's go into the next thing. The other thing is the general visual effects, makeup effects, costume set designs. As I said, I don't want to really compare it with the animated show, but in terms of just the general visual language of the show, it's pretty on point. There was an effort to make something that has its own identity and personality from a visual point of view. You know, the costume, the different. If you go to the water people, their identity is totally different from the fire people. The fire people, the visual characteristic and personality is totally different from the wind people. The wind benders, their personality and visual identity is totally different from the earth benders. So that is one thing that I appreciated. At no point were you in one place and taken to another place and did not know where you are. You know, so that's the other thing that I appreciated about the show. The other thing was the characterization of all the characters. All the characters have an arc. You know, from Zuko to his uncle Ayo, to what's her name, Katara, to Sokka, to the main character, to Zhao. You know, Zhao, the legend, the legendary one. They tried to also give a personality to the crew, you know, to Zuko's crew. There's just a story arc that they used about the crew during a particular episode, which was my favorite episode of them all, that just intertwines the story so well and adds another emotional moment to Zuko's relationship with his crew, Zuko's relationship with Ayo. So those are some of the things that I actually, apart from that, there's also the relationship between Zuko and Ayo. Naturally, if it was another show, they wouldn't be given such attention because Ayo is supposed to be more or less a side character, but he plays a pivotal role in this particular story. His relationship with Zuko is a fantastic relationship because most shows and movies focus on the father-parent relationship. They don't go into the uncle relationship. If you are fortunate enough to have a cool uncle, then this show is a treat. I've been lucky to have a relationship with my uncle in the past, who was like a super cool dude. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but Easter. But yeah, watching this was an interesting experience because it brings back. It just has so much meaning if you got an opportunity to grow up with your uncle and you are cool with your uncle, because most uncles don't try to be your fathers. They try to be your brother but still have that adult sensibility with them. And so Zuko's relationship with his uncle for me was one of the best part about this movie. Not that because I can relate in one way or the other, but because it just adds so much to Ayo's character, especially when you learn about their backstory. And this is where we go into some of my favorite episodes. Some of my favorite episode was one, Spirited Away. The combination of Spirited Away and Masks for me was perfect. The first episode, the combination of Spirited Away and the masks, those three episodes for me were perfect. Spirited Away gives a different tone to the show. It goes more into horror. It feels and looks like a horror movie. There are some terrible. There's Koho. There's a character called Koho who takes people's faces. Wow. There's another gigantic character with like 4 legs. Terrifying. There's a giant owl who is actually from the animated, but I said that I'm not going to compare. So there's a giant owl, and the world is misty. It just feels like a horror movie. It feels like it's straight up from a horror movie. Now Masks, on the other hand, now takes all the emotional aspects of the show. It takes all the moments that make you feel something. There's the relationship between Sako and Katara. There's the relationship between Aang and what does he call King Sumi? Bumi the king, his friend when he was young. And then there is also now the relationship between Zoku and his uncle Aigo. So that episode took a lot of it had a lot of emotional moments within it. That's just, for me, those 3 episodes were just perfect. The other thing that I found really intriguing was just the politics in the movie, especially with Zhao and Azula and Azula's dad, and the way the dad was manipulating his son and daughter in order to gain an advantage. He was just sitting back and manipulating them and letting them do all the hard work because they needed to impress him. One needed to bring Avatar back so that he can be accepted back into the community. The daughter was working so hard to prove to his dad that she was the one, she was the best. So that was pretty interesting. There's the character of Zhao and how Zhao's political relationship with Azula is another interesting political take on the whole show. There's a lot of backbiting, there's a lot of betrayals, there's a lot of scheming, there's a lot of spying in the field. Not a lot, but just enough to make the show more than it's supposed to be. So those elements turn this from a child's show and into a much more grown-up show. A grown-up can actually enjoy this because of those small political moments whereby Zhao is collaborating with Zuko and then suddenly sending a message out to Azula, and then Azula is giving tactical advice. Azola is trying to manipulate his dad, but his dad knows what he's trying to do. And then later on, you learn that the dad was actually manipulating the two. So it's that political, bubble that makes this show super interesting. Even staying into the politics and the grown-up versus the nature of the show, the tone of the show. This show, if you watch it, there are some scenes that feels that the show is designed for teenagers. It feels like Twilight. You remember Twilight? The relationship between this young people relationship. You find young people in area of power. You see a lot of young people within the show. So it kind of feels that way. But then the tone feels that with the politics, with the action set pieces, with some of the scenes, you see people getting burned by these fire people. The action sometimes, it just reminds you of just how, I don't want to use the word dark, just how serious the tone is for this particular show. So that was the other thing, that balance between, yes, it feels like a teenage show, but this is actually a serious show. We are not here to play. This is not your usual teen show. This is actually a serious show. We are trying to do something serious. So that was also pretty cool. That balance between heavy and light moments and heavy, that was pretty cool. The performances were okay. I just liked all the characters, but it's the way the characters are baked into the story that makes everything interesting. It's less of, I wouldn't say that I had one or two favorite characters, but generally all the characters were baked into the story so well that I cannot outright say that there was a weak or there was a strong. They played into the story so well that I can't say that there were characters whose performance really impressed me or disappointed me. Yes, there are disappointments. Yes, there are weak points, but they're not disappointments. There are strong points, but they're not outstanding. I think that's the best way to put it. So, apart from that, what did I not like? Now, the negatives. I think this show was approved because of 3 episodes. The Yoshi episode, which I think is episode 2. Then there is episode 7 and 8 because of the, it's a Netflix show. And it takes the second episode to actually remind you that it's a Netflix show. And they go hard with the messaging in episode 8. They even try, I could see most of the time that they were trying to push the story away from Aang for so long. There were moments that you could feel Netflix struggling with the script writers to push the story away from Aang. You could actually see some scenes that you go like, wait, what is this scene? Why are these people here? Why is this feeling like an assembly? Like characters have just been planted so that you can have that show, you can have that shot that communicates a certain message. I know people who have a problem with wokeness in cinema and shows understand what I'm talking about. Where you have, yes, the story is defined. The story has already been defined. The story is concrete. The show understands what it needs to be. But you have moments where Netflix also want to remind you that this is a very inclusive universe. And so you have some awkward moments where you see a particular group of people and you're like, okay, I'm not talking about one particular group of people. I'm just talking about scenes that feel like they were placed there by Netflix to, check that checklist. They usually have that checklist. So, and I'm not talking about sexual, gender, political. No, I'm just talking about gender in general. They need to push something so that they can remain like we are inclusive. The Yoshi, I didn't have the Yoshi scene, a problem with the Yoshi. When they went to that Yoshi, it's called what? The town where you had a town full of women and they had their own avatar. That I think is a part of the story. There's no problem with that. But where I thought that they took it too far was they were trying to push this story so away from Aang that they actually transformed him into a different avatar, which never happened, which somehow never happens again throughout the show. It just so happens that what they were able to do for that episode could never be able to be done with all these other different avatars. But for this particular avatar, you needed to show that powerful, badass, female character. So they found a way of sneaking that in and then changing everything. so that it doesn't happen again in the future. So for me, I thought that that was a Netflix move. It was so clean. It was so clear that that was a Netflix move. It was a move for them to need to communicate something. So still sticking on gender politics, they also tried to do, there's a character called Azula. Azula's character, at first I was excited because of where they were taking the character, but then they have that episode 8, which I thought, if you talk of gender politics, is the epitome of gender politics, and I think that's why Netflix approved this particular show. So at the end of that all, you have a moment where Azula becomes the boss lady, the big boss lady, and I'm like, that was not necessary. I think you already had something very interesting. I think you should have just maintained the mystery by setting it up in a different way. That was a pretty obvious female power pose moment. If you've seen the show, you understand what I mean. And I didn't have a problem with it. My only problem came up when there were 2 other things after that that gave me the feeling that these 2 scenes could have been cut out. They were not necessary because they don't have an impact on the general take of what might happen in the next season. What do I mean? After that, we get their father scene talking to the advisor, and the advisor is like, there's this thing that is coming, and when it passes through, it's going to give the fire people extra power. So you think to yourself, then why are you showing us Azula as she has conquered a certain place? Was that really necessary? How does this add value to the general story? So that's how I felt about that particular scene. In general, this is a fantastic show, and the other thing I forgot to mention about the goods, about what I also liked about the show, is the show keeps reminding you that Aang is just a kid. Aang is just a kid who's trying to cope with this thing that he doesn't quite understand. He lost his friends, he lost everything. The kid lost everything. The kid lost his friends, he lost his master, he lost his best friend, and then now he's thrown into this world where he's supposed to be the savior of the world, yet he has 100 years later, he has no idea what's happening. People don't want to see him. People, if they see him, people want him to save them. And he doesn't know how to save them. He doesn't know anything. He's just confused, and all he needs are just friends and family. Aang is just a kid who's struggling to, wow. And the way the world was looking at him, like he's supposed to be this savior, but he's just a playful little kid who just wants to enjoy the world for what it is. So you have all this responsibility placed on his shoulder, and he's not ready for it. He never trained for it. Even the show ends without him actually training and becoming what he's supposed to be, the true airbender. Yeah, so that's basically the airbender. If I was to give this, I would give this a 4.7 out of 5. I think it was perfect. Apart from those Netflix moments where you can see them pushing an agenda, you can actually, and I repeat this, just watch the show, you'll see some moments whereby you're like, wait, this is framed funny. There's something wrong with this frame. You have a scene going on, and then you cut to another scene, and you look at characters within the scene, and you can see like they've been planted so that they can be framed to communicate something. So apart from that's why it doesn't get a 5 out of 5. It's more of a 4.7 out of 5. But basically that's it. If you've seen the show, what do you think? I really don't want to compare, and I would advise people not to think of the animated series. It's an adaptation, I understand, but it's also good to give the showrunners the freedom to do their own thing, to try to do their own thing, to try to be creative with the adaptation, so that as much as you are getting what was on the animation, but what is it different about this show that they are bringing on the table, apart from a different color paint? Because for me, if you start comparing this with the animated show, it means that what you're looking for is just a different coat of color. You're not looking for something different in terms of story. You're not trying to look for something different in terms of characterization and pacing and editing. So as much as I enjoyed the animation, and the fact that I actually like that it's a very accurate adaptation. It's actually really, really well adapted from the costume and whatever. But I also like the fact that they actually made an effort to stay within that, but also give us something that is on its own. It can work on its own. You can add it to the Last Airbender library and still have something that is slightly different. Yes, I have a problem with some characters, but generally it's its own thing and it can work in its own. Or they can actually do more shows based on this, as long as they try to remain disciplined. Yeah? They try to remain they just keep the story intact, because that's one thing that I liked about this. The story is there, the emotions are there, you feel the characters feel like people, you sympathize with characters, you feel for them. When some characters like you are sacrificing themselves to save this world, you feel for them, because they've set up Hugh and Sako's character in such a way that you can actually see the stakes, and when it happens, you actually you feel for Sako, you feel for Hugh. So those moments were actually there were those moments that went like, yeah, I'm actually watching a really well made show that was made with passion. So basically that's it. Remember to always watch what you enjoy and enjoy what you watch. Let me know what you thought about the show. Just keep it brief, like, did you like it, did you not like it, did you think that, because let's be honest, it had work elements, but the work elements were overshadowed by by the grand scheme of things, by how the story, the visual effects, the costume, just everything about the show, about the goods overshadowed the bads. So basically that's it. Remember to always watch what you enjoy and enjoy what you watch. Please subscribe. You can watch my video on what I thought, I think it's here, my video on what I thought about the first episode, because the first episode had a huge impression on me. So if you'd like to see it, you can see it over here. You can also subscribe so that I can see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.